We're gonna switch gears here and talk to a guy. Honestly, before yesterday, I had never heard of him. But in my travels, in my online travels, I came across a link that brought me to a website called 28pages.org. Now, regular listeners of the show know that this is something I've been asking questions about for a while. The 9/11 Commission report released many years ago was all made public except for 28 pages that George W. Bush deemed super secret, top secret. I believe it's being, these 28 pages are under lock and key and guard and, punishable by death if you even go near it, don't even touch it, don't even look at it, for whatever reasons. Now, there have been members of Congress and members of the public who've been lobbying to get these 28 pages released to no avail. I guess it's this week, this guy, I came across this page, 28pages.org, and it's a website devoted to the secrets around 9/11 and, the secretive nature of these 28 pages. Well, a guy named John Gold, again, who I had not heard of before yesterday, does a podcast. He hosts the We Were Lied to About 9/11 podcast. Now, it's part of the Soapbox People's Network, and that's Cindy Sheehan's network. And there are some strange bedfellows here, like I know he's been on Alex Jones' show before.
Good morning.
Good morning, John Gold. Hi, it's Nicole Sandler calling. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. How are you doing, Nicole?
I'm doing okay. We are live on the air at radioornot.com. And as I was just telling the listeners, I apologize, but honestly, I had not heard of your podcast before yesterday and I'm almost embarrassed to say I followed a link on Twitter because it looked interesting, something about you interviewing former Florida Governor Bob Graham, who sat on the 9/11 Commission, about those super secret 28 pages that we're not allowed to see. And this is a topic that has always intrigued me, as it should every American, because, we want to know why these 28 pages have still not been released. But so, as I stumbled upon your podcast in this website devoted to the 28 pages called 28pages.org, I thought, well, let's find out what Senator Graham had to say. But I do want to start off with, who you are, John. So you host the We Were Lied to About 9/11 podcast. Tell us about the show, what you do.
Well, for the past, I guess, almost 13 years now, I've been an advocate for 9/11 justice, which means that I saw that we were being lied to, and I was trying to expose that fact. My podcast actually came about, I don't know if you're familiar with Cindy Sheehan.
Of course, and I love Cindy. She was actually just on the show last week from D.C. For her Spring Rising event, still advocating for peace. And so you're part of Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox People's Network. Yes?
Well, yes, correct. I have. Last August, she asked me to start a show about what my interest is, which is 9/11. So I decided to have a show called We Were Lied to About 9/11. I very much don't like the phrase, like, 9/11 was an inside job and so on and so forth. I wanted a message that would be that people would listen to, that people agree with. And most people over the years have shown that they agree with the fact that we were lied to about 9/11. So that was the premise of the show, or that's how I got started.
Uh-huh.
And now, over the years, I've made several contacts with people, and I've been fortunate in that regard. So I've had a series of wonderful guests.
I see. I'm looking through some of the guests you've had on, and it is very impressive. Now, including Bob Graham, who I've had the opportunity to interview a number of times, although not recently. So this is a nice get for you, because Bob Graham's sort of out of the spotlight these days. Now, I got to ask, you said it was his daughter who helped hook you up. Are you talking about Gwen Graham?
No.
Okay.
Well, first off, let me explain that 28pages.org is not my site.
Okay.
That site was founded by somebody by the name of Brian McGlinchey.
Okay.
Brian McGlinchey, I've been helping him along because the families have been fighting for the release of these pages for years.
Yes.
There was an effort underway in, I believe, 2006. The Jersey Girls, the four widows who were responsible for the creation of the 9/11
right,
Commission.
who were then vilified by the right, by Fox and those people. Yeah.
They released a petition calling for the declassification of these 28 redacted pages, and I helped to get almost 17,000 signatures for their petition. They brought it down to Washington D.C. and it was ignored. So they've been fighting for years to get these pages released. So it was only natural that I would go and help Brian, with his effort that focuses on that. So anyway.
Yeah. So, but at the beginning of the podcast, the interview with Bob Graham, you said
the daughter,
right?
Yes.
That his daughter. Now, one of his daughters is Gwen Graham, who was just elected to Congress from the Tallahassee area, who has turned out to be just another conservative, just everything. Bob Graham was great. He was a really good governor. He was a really good senator, and he was he was a person of integrity, I think, on that 9/11 Commission. Who, I guess, as you learned, it sounds like he was he's a bit put off by the fact that these 28 pages have not been made public. Is that the feeling you got?
Absolutely. And, with regards to his daughter, Brian McGlinchey actually gave me the contact information for her name is Kendall Graham.
Okay, a different daughter. All right.
I'm sorry, Kendall Graham Elias, Elias.
All right.
And she and I, corresponded back and forth, and she helped me get that thing together. Now, with regards to the 28 redacted pages, I just want to make it clear to people. There was an investigation that started in early 2002 called the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11. Mm-hmm. That Bob Graham was the co-chair of, and that investigation released a report that had 28 redacted pages in it. Later, years later, we had the 9/11 Commission, which Bob Graham was not a part of. And they were essentially, their job was to start off where the Joint Congressional Inquiry left off. And they said they looked into the 28 redacted pages and found that Philip Zelikow, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, said that they were wild accusations. And basically they said that they found that they were lacking, that the information within them was lacking. So
Really?
They did not include that information in the 9/11 report. In fact, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow, took part in a late-night editing session, quote, a late-night editing session with Dieter Snell to remove Saudi support for the hijackers from the 9/11 report, and they relegated it to footnotes in the back of the book against the wishes of the staffers who worked on this aspect of the investigation.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I'm as you're talking, I'm sitting here doing a search on my external backup drives. I was on Air America for its last year or so on the air, and it was around that time that I got to interview Richard Benveniste, who was, I believe, one of the co-chairs of the 9/11 Commission, who talked about in 5 years everything from that report will be made public. Well, 5 years came and went since then, and still we have a lot of stuff that's still not been made public.
Right.
Including, most notably, these 28 pages. Now, we know about the 28 pages. I mentioned before when I first contacted you yesterday, waiting to hear back from Alan Grayson, who is a congressman from Florida, and sadly not my congressman, but hopefully he'll be my senator soon. Anyway, he and I have talked about these 28 pages before. He believes they should be released, but it's really sort of chilling. I think that's the proper word to use here. When you know that something pertaining to the most horrific event of certainly our lifetimes, one of the most horrific events in the history of this nation, and that there's part of it that we're not allowed to see. And all evidence points to those 28 pages detailing the involvement of the Saudis in 9/11. And you, point blank, you asked Bob Graham about that, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Well, over the years, that's the one thing that's been known about with regards to the 28 redacted pages is that it has to do with Saudi involvement in the 9/11 attacks. I'd like to point out, though, that the cover-up, the 28 redacted pages, is only one of a multitude of cover-ups concerning the 9/11 attacks.
Uh-huh.
The 9/11 Commission, as I just pointed out, was completely compromised and corrupt. And a lot of, you spoke with Ben Beniste, the documentation, the National Archives has yet to release all of the information from the 9/11 Commission.
Wow.
And a lot of the information from the 9/11 Commission that has been released is greatly redacted. So it's not only the 28 redacted pages from the Joint Congressional Inquiry, it's also, documentation from the 9/11 Commission as well. But yes, Saudi Arabia. And, my thing is, yes, Saudi Arabia, individuals in Saudi Arabia should be held accountable for their actions. I've always believed that 9/11 was a crime and that individuals responsible for that crime need to be held accountable, and not everyone who believes in a particular ideology or religion or people that come from a country. That's called collective punishment.
Uh-huh.
And it's a war crime, and it's against the Geneva Conventions. So anyway, yes, I believe that individuals within Saudi Arabia need to be held accountable, but then you need to look at the United States. And what did the United States do, after the Afghanistan-Russia war, when we had this collaboration between the CIA, the Saudis, and the Pakistani ISI to fund, train, and arm the Mujahideen, which later became Al-Qaeda. In the 1990s, we were so protective of Saudi Arabia. There was an FBI agent by the name of Robert Wright, who started an investigation into terrorist financing, which led a lot to Saudi Arabia. And he called that investigation vulgar betrayal. He was, essentially blocked, and that investigation was shut down. Incidentally, one of the individuals he investigated was somebody by the name of Yassin Al-Qadi, who claims that he was friends with Dick Cheney, but regardless. And, George Tenet had close ties to Prince Bandar. He would have meetings with Prince Bandar, and his subordinates weren't even aware of what they talked about. And in fact, they were asked to kind of back off the Saudis and so forth. And this is all before 9/11. And not to mention the fact that we collaborated with the Saudis to arm the Bosnian Muslims in the 90s and stuff like that. So, you can point a finger at Saudi Arabia, but I think, 5 fingers could also be pointed back towards the United States.
Without a doubt. And then Yes.
So they're enabling and collaborating with.
Well, right, and you have to wonder. I mean, look, it's no secret that W came into office wanting war with Iraq.
Absolutely.
Everything we've read, we know he wanted to show his dad that he's tougher than he is. Wanted to, and there was Dick Cheney and his Halliburton cronies that he wanted to enrich. There's W, who wanted to prove he could actually make it in the oil industry. I mean, there's so much there. But that said, John Gold, host of the We Were Lied To About 9/11 podcast, what exactly do you think we were lied to about? Do you think that there was a direct involvement of Bush, Cheney et al. In 9/11? Or
the thing is, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The thing is I admittedly, or I openly admit that I don't actually know what happened on 9/11 or who was ultimately responsible. The way I look at 9/11 is that it was a crime. It wasn't an act of war. It was a mass murder. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And I believe that along with people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, that elements within our government and other governments have more than earned the title of suspect for the crime of 9/11. And I believe, honestly, if we would ever manage to get it into a court of law, that I think we would be proven right on a lot of that. Now, you mentioned Bush when he came into office. One of the first things that he did was he told the alphabet agencies, the FBI, CIA, and so forth, to back off the Saudis and the bin Ladens. Now, as I said, this was normal policy pretty much during the Clinton administration, but according to Greg Palast, under Clinton it was slow go, but under Bush it was no go.
Right.
So that's one of the first things that he did. And, we mentioned the Saudis, Prince Bandar. There are allegations that he is connected, or his wife is connected, to money of two of the hijackers that were living in San Diego. There are other allegations concerning Bandar, apparently. But did you know that in the months prior to 9/11, George Bush and Prince Bandar were talking about the need for decisive action in Iraq?
Well,
I always found that.
Well, you got to look. You keep referring to Prince Bandar, and when I hear Bandar, I always want to put the Bush after it, because he was known as Bandar Bush because of his very, very close relationship to the Bush family. I should add now, Bill Clinton is also, sort of an honorary Bush brother, because they've taken him into the fold, which should be really disturbing to anyone as we look at today's Democratic Party trying to coronate Hillary Clinton as the 2016 nominee. Just because of these very close ties. I just raise a red flag of caution. So there's so many secrets we don't know. And when sitting members of Congress can't even, look at these documents that have been redacted, you have to wonder what they're hiding. And to go back to the 28 pages again, the reason they're secret is because, from what I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're obviously, much more schooled in this issue than I am, but George W. Bush himself said these 28 pages need to go into the archives and be under lock and key for no one ever to lay eyes on. Is that sort of close to the truth?
At the end of the Joint Congressional Inquiry, there was a press briefing held, and Nancy Pelosi was there, Porter Goss was there, Bob Graham was there, and Nancy Pelosi said that Porter Goss worked with the White House to decide on what would be classified and what wouldn't be classified. So, yes, essentially, the White House decided that the 28 pages needed to be redacted. The 28 redacted pages during the Joint Congressional Inquiry, the Bush administration was anything but cooperative. First off, they asked Tom Daschle not to investigate the attacks at all. In fact, that was the very first thing that ever caught my attention with regards to 9/11, because like everybody else after 9/11, I was very much into revenge. We got to get these guys. We got to carpet bomb the Middle East. And I believed everything that the TV was telling me. And then I saw this report on CNN where it said that Bush and Cheney personally asked Tom Daschle to, quote, limit the scope of the congressional inquiry. But we found out later from Tom Daschle that they asked him not to investigate the attacks at all. So during the joint congressional inquiry, there were people like somebody by the name of Abdusattar Sheikh, who was an FBI informant, who also happened to be the landlord of the two hijackers that were living in San Diego. And, the Joint Congressional Inquiry tried to get him to testify, but the FBI fought against him testifying, and I can only assume under the direction of the Bush White House that they fought to keep him from testifying, and they succeeded. That's somebody you'd think you'd want to talk to.
You would think. Right. So your premise when you say we were lied to about 9/11 means that obviously there's a lot being kept from us, and we as American citizens, we have a right to know what happened, and the fact that our government is lying to us is blatantly just wrong on every conceivable level. Although you're not saying exactly what they lied to us about. You're not, as you started when you first came on, John, you're not like an inside job person saying definitively this is what happened. You're saying we don't know.
I just hate that phrase. To me, going around screaming 9/11 was an inside job, you may as well be going around screaming that Elvis is still alive.
Right.
It's the same kind of
give me proof.
Impact on people.
Right.
But I could name a multitude of things. After 9/11, we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings, that nobody had any idea that this was going to happen, that it was a complete surprise attack like Pearl Harbor. And then in May of 2002, news of the August 6th PDB came out, which was labeled Bin Laden determined to strike in the U.S., and it talked about hijackings or other types of attacks, and buildings in New York were being photographed, and so on and so forth. I mean, when I found out that there was a warning, that we were lied to, essentially, that there was a warning, I was off to the races.
Right.
And, we found out over the years that there were so many warnings coming in from everywhere that who knows what they knew exactly.
Right, exactly. Not only that, the August 6th presidential daily briefing that we all know, and some of us can recite Condoleezza Rice's testimony on that by heart because it was so sickening. But we also learned that, when during the transition from the Clinton administration to the Bush administration, that the Clinton people said, look, beware of Al-Qaeda. Terrorism is a real threat. And then we learned that from the time the Bush administration took office in January to September 11th, they didn't have one meeting of the terrorist task force. There were some scheduled, but they kept canceling it because it was not a priority for them. You have to wonder why not.
Well, let me bring up a few things.
Okay.
One of the first things that Bush did when he came into office during his very first principals meeting, according to former Secretary Treasury Paul O'Neill, it was all about finding a way to go into Iraq. It was the president saying, go find me a way to do this. And then, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Richard Clark, the former counterterrorism czar, in 2007, during an interview, he actually stated that members within the Bush administration prior to 9/11 were discussing creating a casus belli in order to get us into war. Did you know that?
No. They were creating a what?
A casus belli, which is essentially an excuse for war.
Right. Oh, well, yeah.
They were talking about creating one.
Right. I did hear that. Yes, and so there is ample reason not to trust what we've been told all along. But then where do we go from here? Because look, my biggest criticism of Barack Obama, and I've got plenty, but my biggest criticism of him was his "we're going to look forward, not back" bullshit. My biggest criticism of Nancy Pelosi was her saying when she was ascending, she hadn't even become speaker yet, but saying impeachment is off the table. You know, fuck impeachment. How about just an investigation into what happened there? We have former White House officials who blatantly lied to the American people, who I believe are guilty of war crimes, who most likely cannot leave this country because so many other nations would arrest them, and we can't have an investigation here in the U.S. into their actions? That is troubling. But, John Gold, do you see any reason to think that there will ever be an investigation?
Well, one of the things about the 28 redacted pages is one of the reasons that it's important to get them released is that the families want to use them in a court of law against Saudi Arabia. And anytime that 9/11 makes it into a courtroom, we generally find out things that we never knew about. There was a recent something that took place in court, and we found out that I think Mohammed Atta was casing one of the airports, stuff like that. It just comes out. And I think that's one of the reasons that people did not want federal trials for the 9/11-5 in Gitmo. Instead, they wanted military commissions because federal court, they can be corrupt, but they're not as controlled. It's not as controlled an environment as they are in the military commissions. So I don't think it was just about torture that people were afraid of. I think it was about what might come out during court proceedings. So I don't know what the answer is. With regards to what you said about Obama coming in saying we need to move forward, and, a lot of people say that about 9/11, that we need to move on. It happened 14 years ago. And I don't know if you're familiar with the comedian Bill Hicks.
Oh, yes.
He had a funny saying about, he would talk about the JFK assassination all the time. And he used to say that people would come up to him and say, come on, Bill, it took place 40 years ago. We don't need to talk about that anymore. And he would say, okay, well, then don't bring up Jesus to me.
Right.
That's
a great. Well, Bill Hicks was brilliant, but yeah, I mean it's true, and I think it's important for us to keep asking questions. And I got to say, John Gold, I'm really happy to hear how sensible and logical you are. Look, I've interviewed people. I was at the Veterans for Peace conference a couple of years ago. They were in Miami, and I broadcast live from there. And there was a representative there from, like engineers and scientists.
Architects and engineers for 9/11.
There you go, Truth. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And although the guy made a lot of sense, but they come across as sort of wackadoodle. There's the whole 9/11 truthers, and just by virtue of the label, they sound kind of crazy. You sound like you're approaching this in a very reasoned way. And do you consider yourself a 9/11 truther?
Well, I'm actually the person who coined that.
Are
phrase,
you?
actually.
Wow.
Yes.
Look at that. And you don't sound crazy at all.
No, imagine that. And, I coined that phrase years ago, and I'll tell you how the story came to be. Back in 2004, Howard Stern had posted something on his website questioning the 9/11 attacks. It was a movie. I forget what it was, but as a result, people like me who were trying to get the truth out about 9/11 flocked to his website. And one of the individuals who was helping to promote information came to me and they said, oh my God, I'm so tired of all these people attacking me and saying all these horrible things about me. And I tried to say something inspirational to him. And I live in Pennsylvania, and the Quakers are a big thing in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Now, I'm not the one who coined the phrase 9/11 truth. That was somebody by the name of Nicholas Levis. But basically, I just took Quaker and 9/11 truth and put them together, and I said, you're a 9/11 truther. You're doing the right thing, or something to that effect. And, here's the definition I wrote for what a 9/11 truther is.
Okay.
In my mind, a 9/11 truther is someone who fights alongside the family members seeking truth and accountability for the 9/11 attacks. In my mind, a 9/11 truther is someone who fights for the sick and dying 9/11 first responders who need health care desperately. In my mind, a 9/11 truther is someone who does not like how the day of 9/11 is being used to inflict pain and suffering around the world and is trying to stop it. Stop it by using the truth, something we have been denied by our government regarding the attacks.
Wow.
So now look, when you think about the phrase 9/11 truther, because of the different hit pieces over the years from the corporate media attacking anyone who questions 9/11 truth, essentially a 9/11 truther has become the equivalent of a baby killer or a dog torturer.
Yeah, right. Well, because some of them have come out in sort of, craziness, pointing fingers where they don't have truth. They don't have facts behind them. But John Gold, it sounds like you're taking a very measured approach to this, and I think it's really important work. You're on Twitter at 9/11 Justice now. Where's the best place for people to find you and find the podcast online? I have the iTunes link, and I'll post it. I'll link to it from my blog at radioornot.com. But is there a simple URL where people can find you?
Well, again, the shows are posted primarily on CindySheehanSoapbox.com. They are available on iTunes, as you mentioned, and they're also available on my YouTube channel, which has a multitude of informational videos, and that's Gold 9472.
Gold 9472. That's YouTube. Okay. I will put links to all of it on the blog at radioornot.com. And John Gold, I thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the conversation.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me to be on.
My pleasure. Hopefully we can talk again.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. And I will also, I'll embed John's interview with my former governor, former senator from Florida, Bob Graham, about those 28 pages.